Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to Connect Spring. My name's Peter Giannetti with the International Housewares Association, and this is the final session of Connect Spring. Wrap it up, the big takeaways. Let me go over a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Our speakers will be taking questions at the end of the session, so please go ahead and use the Q&A function to submit your questions at any time during the session. And these sessions are being recorded. They'll be available on IHA's website within 2 weeks of the event conclusion, so around mid-April. This session is sponsored by Jura, the innovation leader in automatic coffee machines, offering a true bean-to-cup experience that is freshly ground, not capsuled. Thanks to Jura for supporting Connect Spring. With that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Once again, we have Leana Salamah, who's the Vice President of Marketing for IHA. We have Joe Derochowski, the Vice President and Home Industry Advisor for the NPD Group, and Tom Mirabile, the founder and principal of Springboard Futures and Consumer Trend Analyst for IHA. The complete bios of our speakers are available at the Connect Spring page at theinspiredhomeshow.com/connect. Thanks everyone for being here, and it's great to see you all again. So let's get started. When we first got together about a month ago to begin working on the Market Watch video sessions, I think my first comment to all of you was, it's been quite a year. And that was kind of the starting point for some interesting conversations about what had happened in the past year. Well, I think as we kind of meet today and as we get ready to close up Connect Spring, my comment to you is it's been quite a couple of weeks. Connect Spring has served up a bounty of informative sessions for the home and housewares business, a business that's hungry for insights and solutions to help drive growth as we ease, hopefully, toward the other side of this pandemic. Today, we're going to talk about some of the key takeaways and the common threads connecting much of the information we heard during Connect Spring. So not surprisingly, that overriding thread is the consumer. It all starts with the consumer. And Tom, I know you have some thoughts about making a distinction between consumer-centric and customer-centric. Some people think they mean the same thing, and maybe it's not quite the same anymore. What are your thoughts on that whole premise?
Yeah, it's not. I think, especially now that we're at the beginning of really focusing on the consumer, it's important to make the distinction. When we talk about customer-centric, usually it's a single company or an organization making sure that they're talking very specifically to their target audience. And when we're talking about consumer-centric, we understand the larger consumer, sort of where people's heads are at, where their minds are at, what they're living, what their pain points are in a much broader sense. And that's really the important place to be right now, because it helps us respond to consumers more authentically, because we can relate to what they're going through. And also it helps us, as a lot of businesses are trying to claw off other businesses, we're trying to understanding the consumer broadly really helps us develop ancillary businesses more.
Joe, when you think of consumer-centric, and we look back at what's been discussed the last couple of weeks, what does consumer-centric mean in that context?
Well, I think part of it is you're thinking beyond the transaction. You're really listening to them and empathizing with them, trying to figure out a way to help solve their needs, help better their lives. So it's a little bit more of a passive, but yet you're really trying to connect, and then using that as a platform to think of new ways to solve their needs and new ways to help them in a different perspective.
Leana, we'll talk about shared experiences as we go through this today, and your thought of kind of how it's not a one-size-fits-all marketplace, but we have to look at a wide scope right now when you're dealing with the consumer. It's no longer one consumer for one place, one consumer for the next place. It's really all consumers for all places.
Yeah, I think that when Tom talks about, being customer-centric versus consumer-centric, being customer-centric is about paying attention to kind of your piece of the consumer pie, if you will. And certainly as a lifelong marketer and brander in branding professional, I am all for the importance of not trying to be all things to all people, of knowing who you are and who you're for. But what has happened this past year is there has been this absolute breakdown of silos in different channels where people are shopping and different needs that they're, that they're fulfilling in different places. People are suddenly buying housewares. Now they were buying some housewares, on an ancillary basis at grocery stores, but suddenly housewares have become a major profit center for grocery stores because consumers' mindsets have changed about how they shop, where they shop, how many different places they want to go. So the idea that a retailer is still serving just that traditional piece of the consumer pie, I think is an outdated way of thinking. I think you have to really think about where's the additional opportunity now that those silos have been broken down.
Well, there's always been a kind of a linear approach of defining your boundaries in retailing, and a consumer wouldn't cross. The perception was the consumer wouldn't cross those boundaries. Well, the consumer was put in a position to cross boundaries this year because they were put in a position to find products wherever they could find products sometimes, and a business where we've seen the pie grow exponentially in the last year. It may not always grow at that rate. So it's not always about the growth of the overall market. It's about getting your fair share of the pie and finding ways to extend your market rather than just serve the market you've had for years. And again, what worked in the past is not what's going to necessarily work in the future. Leana, one of the things in that context, and we'll talk. Joe, did you have something to add to that? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, it's funny. We have this way to track all the purchases that somebody does over a period of time with our checkout tracking. And whenever I look at a store saying what percent of your shoppers, what percent of the housewares are they getting, nobody is ever getting 100%. It's always been in the single digits or maybe double digits. People are just shopping all over the places. And so
right.
I think you got to really be thinking back to that.
So in many cases, that's a new customer. That's a new opportunity. And we'll talk a lot about how do you retain these new customers going forward. Back to Leana, when we look back again at, kind of defining the consumer, the pandemic kind of showed us that the consumer needed things, and there was a basic need that drove business, and it was that transactional approach to business, which was very helpful to the industry and those parts of the industry that could serve it. But as we kind of ease our way kind of through the tunnel to hopefully the other side of that tunnel, we have to get back to an aspirational consumer. Many of the sessions this week talked about how the consumer is going to transition from that basic transactional need to an aspirational want. Talk a little bit about the need to understand this evolving kind of consumer behavior back to the want side and kind of how that becomes an opportunity for the housewares industry all over again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think to your point, I think that, maybe a year and a half ago, we were very much in a want-centric economy. When we looked at consumer trends, as part of putting together the Market Watch report, these were things that were very aspirational in nature. I want health and wellness, and I want experience, and I want kind of all of these like really enriching things, right? Whereas now, in this past year, we've really shifted to more of what do you need? What do you need to get by? How do you need things to be different? And I do want to go back. I'm going to answer your question, but I want to go back to what you mentioned, which is the whole notion of shared experiences, because right. I think that goes back to this idea of, the silo breakdowns and the idea of kind of re-examining your customer base, because what has happened is that for the first time, maybe, since world wars, and I can't take credit for this statement, Michelle Lamb and I were talking about this, you have a globally shared experience here that does not delineate between upper, middle, lower class. I mean, certainly there's different circumstances that people have, but certainly in the past, there might have been this notion that a higher end customer would never do curbside pickup, right? It's all about the in-store experience and the touch points. And all of a sudden, a retailer who operates that way has to look at what someone else is doing and say, yeah, that might work for my clientele as well, because there's a shared experience there between our customer bases. And I suddenly have things to learn from other retailers or other brands that maybe I would have thought were in a totally different market space than I was before.
Can I go a little bit, I think to elaborate a little bit on what Leana's talking about. When something, the consumer right now, you mentioned World War II, but we have not gone through a sort of, I hate to use the word homogenized emotional experience. We've not gone through something together as a society, probably ever, that's been like this in any of our respective lifetimes. Even if you go back to the biggest world war that, that we can think of that some generations still experienced, it's even then you had soldiers experiencing war differently from, the people who were left at home differently from children. The pandemic is a universal experience. We're all experiencing it the same as our kids, our neighbors in real time. And it's created a mandate for empathy. It's created a mandate for treating consumers like
the way you want to be treated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter whether you're a bank, we consult with banks, we consult with, FMCGs. It doesn't matter what family of business you're in. The expectation is, where I've been, and I expect you to help me get through this in whatever way your business can. So we're gifted. I think you said it this week, Leana, or maybe it was you, Joe, but somebody said, we're so lucky. Our industry is in their homes every day. 3 times a day, they're making meals. It's a great point of contact,
Joe, you've talked about sticking on this shared experience idea. You've talked about empathy and empathy is an opportunity. I mean, that's where these people in business are consumers as well. They learned they were going through the same things as their customers were going through. And Tom has said it's not about I get you anymore. It's about I am you. But Joe, talk a little bit more about empathy and how empathy now converts into the opportunity for innovation and the opportunity going forward. If this industry is going to stay relevant as it's been, especially during the pandemic.
I think part of it is we've set ourselves up for a great future if we want it and if we act on it. Almost all great innovation starts by somebody looking and listening and observing what people are doing and thinking, is there a better way? And understanding the frustrations. And like you said, all of us in the industry, not only are we manufacturers, retailers, and business people, but we are also consumers dealing with this. So I think we have a better ear, and in B, we're able to observe it more. So the key now is being able to look at that and thinking about it differently. Is there a different way to solve this? Not just how my product can solve it, but is there even a different way than what we're currently thinking about on how to solve that need? Because if we use that, there are so many opportunities to help better consumers' lives over the next 10 years that are all being identified in 2021 as we go through these changes. Like, this is a wonderful year to set up the future for us. If we listen, if we watch, and we brainstorm, what can we do different to solve it? How can we make it better, faster, cheaper, healthier, some sort of over that existing behavior?
But I think too, and this has come up several times over the last couple of weeks of sessions, and we've certainly talked about it as a group, is, the age of being able to kind of, spend, once annually looking at the consumer and identifying what they're all about and what they're going to be doing the next year, is probably gone by the wayside and probably isn't coming back anytime soon. The need to pivot consistently and over again is going to be here to stay. And, being in the events industry, pivot is like an overused word because, a year ago it was, everyone's got to pivot to digital. But we talked about this in the post-COVID consumer panel. We talked about kind of this step function back to normal. We're not going to all wake up one day and it's going to be normal again, and we don't even know what normal is. When you look at people, Michelle Lamb did her presentation on Harvest, Halloween and Holiday, and she talked about it's this kind of like, you see this transitional period happening, right? Where there's a lot of emotion and nostalgia and comfort and togetherness, but stopping short of opulence or, extravagance or any of that. So there's going to be at least one, if not multiple transitions that consumers are going to go through before we reach any kind of baseline that's sustainable for any period of time. So it's challenging, it's exciting, but it's also challenging as an industry to have to look at that and say, the consumer that I'm dealing with right now might not be the same consumer. It could be the same person, but they might be in a totally different headspace in 6 months. And I have to be ready for that.
Right. It's the currency of emotion, I think, is what we discussed. Tom, your thoughts about how businesses have to both plan, but be flexible and pivot as fast as they can. It's not an easy thing historically in business to do that.
Peter, you said something yesterday. Yeah, you used a phrase, and it was honestly the first time that I heard it. And you kept talking about the continuum of the pandemic.
Right.
And that's critical. We've got to, even within our own house, we've got to start talking about pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. We are an interpandemic business. We live on that continuum of the pandemic. And it is, to Leana's point, it's changing constantly. It's about listening. It's about, that's why we don't talk about, at Springboard, we don't talk about, the new normal, we talk about the now normal, because normal can change and varying in your business. It can change in a week. We have to be good listeners. And I know that there's a tremendous challenge with, how do you stock balance to that? But when you've got people like Target saying, look, we're forecasting for us is 3 months out, not 3 years. We're really looking at what's happening. Sorry, Leana, you want to say something?
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, I think that it doesn't mean you throw your hands up in the air and you're like, I don't know, I guess
Right.
I'll know when I get there.
No.
There are some things that can be put into place to be thinking about if this, then that. And one of the presentations that I think did a really nice job of laying some of that out this year was Don Unser from NPD Group, because he talked about retail trends, but then he talked about looking forward and discussed it in a way of saying, okay, when we kind of get to this point as a society where we've got this much vaccination that's been rolled out and we've got this, now things might look like this, whereas, another 3 months, and he kind of laid out some different circumstances, and he put timestamps on them, but they were fluid, right? They were saying this could be Q3, but these circumstances might not come until Q4. But at least once you see them and recognize them, you already have kind of a plan in your head. And he also did a really nice job of laying out some things to look for, right? Or what are early indicators of where consumers are headed? And Joe, I'm sure you got a lot to say on that, so I'll turn it over to you. But I really like this idea that there are bellwethers and there are things to look for, and there are some fluid, light plans you can lay down. You just have to be prepared to adjust up and down the continuum.
Joe, you in your talk on the post-COVID consumer, which is, as we learned, not necessarily a post-COVID consumer, it is a moving target, if you will. You laid out some of the key highlights of what to expect. And I also like something you said yesterday as well, too, that if for those companies trying to figure out how to do it, all they have to do is look back through the last 12 months, they did it. Yeah. And the ones that did it the best are the ones that should be in a good position. You've gone through this already. That kind of should be in your DNA. Summarize your thoughts on that and give us a couple of quick highlight takeaways of how this continuum might progress kind of in the next few months into 2022.
Yeah, I think one of the keys this year is agility, and that is one way to compete against your competitors, but more importantly, the other things that we're competing against, the other industries that the consumer has. And so if we can be a little bit more agile, whether it's in how we position our products, whether it's in the assortment that we have, whether how we manage inventory and supply is going to be a key part of it. But there are some things that we can start to think about. Like, we do know that at some point, as Don talked about, there's going to be this summer where people, after you get the vaccine, you're going to want to visit family and friends again. And when that happens, usually that means, guess what? We're entertaining. There's going to be food involved. There's going to be serving and beverages, which opens up a huge opportunity for us. Then those groups are going to get larger. Well, then that changes the foods you serve. That changes how you serve them. Right. But guess what? There's still food and beverages. That's a good news source right there. And then once school starts at that time, and it sounds like, as Matt Powell and some of the other guys mentioned, it sounds like we're going to be doing back to school. Well, now we're going to start to get these time pressures that happen, as well as when we go to work. So now it's going to be the struggle of, okay, I've got a little less time, and the evening activities with the kids' sports or going to concerts or whatever the case is back. Well, when that comes, it's more about the time element. So how do I keep the behaviors I'm having right now and yet adjust to the time, which again opens up a huge opportunity for innovation, but it also changes the way you might position your product to better help at that time too.
I'm sorry, Tom. The notion of product positioning is just really near and dear to my heart. And you mentioned a couple of times here, Joe, and I think that's so important for people to keep in mind. I don't know how many people watching this session were able to catch any of the Market Watch segments that we did. But one of the things that really jumped out at me right from the beginning of working on Market Watch this year was this idea that it doesn't have to be about brand new products, right? It doesn't have to be brand new stuff. Sometimes it's about taking what you already have and repositioning it and making it fit the need as it exists. I mean, this morning's session was on safety and security, and we had placemats and we had cake pans in there, right? You know, because safety and security comes from a number of different ways. When we talked about comfort, you know, I mean, there were things in there that were like, you know, comfort inherently feels like it's a blanket and it's textiles and it's this and that. Well, no, it's also comfort food. And it's also about things that bring people together, because that's what's comforting to us right now. During the lessons from industries keynote, Larissa from NPD talked about, you know, she's in the beauty, and that's just a tough place to be right now. But I was shocked to hear about the uptick in fragrance, because to me, I was like, I don't put perfume on unless I'm leaving the house. You know, I put that on for my cats. But, you know, what's really happened is that people are finding comfort in the familiarity of those smells, and the familiarity of that kind of, you know, sensory aspect that is missing from their lives now. So fragrance is doing really, really well. Who knew? So it's really about paying attention to what's fitting the consumer's need. You don't have to invent something new to fit the consumer's needs. Sometimes you just have to reposition what you already have.
Tom, I want to get your thoughts on this in the context of something you've said. You've talked about in the past, you mentioned during one of the sessions that, you know, reactive has historically had a bad kind of connotation in this industry as opposed to proactive. We all want to be proactive, but there is a notion here that being reactive and doing it well has been kind of the core of success in business the last several months. And to this point of the stickiness of consumer trends, maybe we shouldn't be thinking so much about what trends are going to be sticky and for how long, because that might throw us into the trap of just preparing for those trends. It's really about understanding which of these businesses are sort of laying the foundation for the next layer of development, and how can you react to that going forward? Put that in some of the into context, if you could, please.
Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, I think it starts with, we're also used to thinking proactively. I mean, that's
Right.
the mandate, think proactively, you know, but like you know, like as you said, the people who can be reactive right now are the ones who are going to succeed. And as Leana pointed out, some of that is looking back. You know, when we talk about, you know, and as you said, it's not in the item a lot of times. It's getting back to 30,000 feet and saying, what am I seeing? You know, what am I seeing when I look at the market right now? Like, there are a couple of Don Unser's NPD address, you know, he was very clear about the fact that there was significantly less price point resistance than they had expected in housewares. That tells you something. And, you know, we just did a nationwide survey. Springboard did it in cooperation with, Project Partners. And the upshot was quality is number one right now nationally. Quality is the number one concern. It's outstripping, and the order of the top three is price, trust, quality. Okay, quality is number one right now because we're realizing we're using these things longer. So what does that tell you about what your assortment should be? Because before it was about convenience. Okay, during the pandemic, and this is the continuum we're talking about, during the pandemic, convenience was number one. I have to have it now, and that represented certain opportunities for, if you're out of stock on one brand, I get to try a new brand, all of that. But that continuum is moving us away from sheer convenience as the primary driver and sheer price. When you've got consumers saying by a 10-point margin that quality is more important than price, it's a tremendous opportunity for us to reinvent ourselves. You know, and
interesting about quality. In Mark Tritton's conversation with Marshall Cohen, he let us know that Bed Bath hadn't really been operating in the opening price point segment. They saw that as an opportunity to do that. With a new controlled brand that they're an owned brand, as they call it. But his point was, it's not just about opening price point. The real opportunity is to deliver opening price point with a degree of quality that not just, that almost exceeds the price, but meets the expectations of their customers right now.
It's an important distinction because quality does not mean price point. The two are completely different. And I think Bed Bath & Beyond, that approach is brilliant. To say, you know what, and every market, you know, right now, every consumer wants every price point. They're looking for the best value that they can. But sometimes in our industry, quality is king. Quality is about durability. It means to younger generations, less landfill. To older generations, it's more longevity. It means different things to different generations, but super important.
When we talk about longevity, We learned from Michelle Lamb and Leanne Schwarzkopf that trend has a cycle to it. Core is basic, it's there, it's the foundation, but trend is the opportunity. And we've learned that certain trends have kind of emerged through this pandemic. Again, what sticks and what doesn't stick, we'll see. Leana, you mentioned earlier about this sort of need to be, you can be luxurious without being opulent, but what else did we learn about design trends? What are consumers looking for? They want some sort of simplicity in their life, but they don't want it necessarily to be boring. What were some of the takeaways you got from that?
You know, what I saw, and Leanne went, or I'm sorry, Michelle, and during her presentation with Leanne, went through 3 different kind of home decor trends. And it was
Japandi?
Handy.
Thank you. Japandi, cottagecore, and contemporary
Contrast.
Thank
There
you.
you
I'm remembering the visuals.
I got the notes in front of me right here.
Thank you. But you know what I saw in all 3 of those was a sense of order and control, right? But not over the top, which was interesting because a lot of times when I think about a very, very orderly house, you know, or a very tightly controlled house, you know, I think of something that's very kind of stark and, you know, almost like what's the, you know, the Kim Kardashian's house that's like all white and like hard angles and like, you know, okay, well, it feels very in control, but also very, you know, very not welcoming. And these were trends that really felt like they were, you know, the Japan one and the contemporary one were very kind of like a playful version of control, right? And actually, I suppose cottagecore too. Cottagecore is a little like controlled chaos, right? It's very floral and patterns and all of this, but in a controlled and kind of tightly managed way. So I think that speaks to the idea that we do want some control and some sense of like, you know, order and structure, but that we want it in a very kind of like joyful and, you know, soothing kind of way, you know, that you really want to be immersed in.
What I love about Japandi, the way she presented it was, you know, it's the Asian influence is wabi-sabi style, which is about the beauty of imperfection. And I think that idea of, instead of embracing Japanese as we traditionally have, which is very structured, and we're embracing the beauty, even materials, the material matters section, where we're talking about materials that change as you use them. And, you know, that idea of touching and evolution and imperfection and embracing that instead of having to hold a standard that's just not realistic, you know.
It's interesting. Michelle also talked about in her Harvest, Halloween, and holiday session that people are going to start going to people's homes to visit during the holidays. And it's almost like they're doing it for the first time all over again. And your guests are going to be looking at your house in such a way, they're going to be evaluating your decor. So you're going to need to decorate with purpose, and she went through that. But your guests are going to be really paying attention. Joe, you told the story with regard to curiosity. How curiosity now is kind of a new opportunity again as we kind of move through this pandemic and people start going out again, and specifically start going into home. What was that story you had to tell?
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who tonight their son is playing football pretty close to where I live. And she goes, hey, we're going to be driving by your house. Now, she hasn't been in my house in a few years. So we're going to be driving by your house and stuff. I want to stop by and see your new kitchen and new bathroom. Like, where did that come from? Like, I don't want to see you and see the kids. But it was like letting you know, it's really trying to figure out. And if you think about it, when people go on a diet and they've lost weight, we all sit there and go, how'd you do that? We want to know. When you're in college and you hadn't seen your friends for the whole summer and you go back and you see them, like you generally are excited to see them, but you also want to know what's new, what's going on with them. And it's kind of, that's the direction we are right now. But by being a pandemic life, it's like when we start going out and seeing our friends and seeing what's new, we want to know what's new with them because we truly want to know and be excited with them. But we're also a little bit wanting to go, I wonder if there's something that I can learn, because I'm also in the midst of change. And that is really one of the interesting parts that when we talked about the agility a little bit ago, like if we can listen for that and adapt to it, there's a lot of room that we can help there.
Well,
Leana, I thought it was interesting that you asked, or one of the commentators asked Lee Eisman kind of where she gets her inspiration from and how does she make these choices. that curiosity, and it all plays into shared experience. It plays. I know that you felt that was an interesting kind of point in that conversation.
It was, I've moderated a couple sessions, a couple Q&A sessions with Lee Eisman in the past, and it's always delightful to hear her enthusiasm and passion in talking about color. But this time around was interesting because we got a lot of questions that were less about, we got the questions about what's the longevity of this, or, how do you feel about that? But we got the questions about, like, Lee, what color are your walls, right? And Lee, what do you do to go out and get inspired? Because I think and part of it has to do, I think, with the fact that, we're not traveling and we're not, necessarily going to a lot of different people's houses, and we don't have the same inputs as we did before. So we're craving more inputs and more ideas and more ways to go about things. And and Lee said, she said, I normally would be traveling the world and I would be going to all these events and all this. She said, and now I'm finding my inspiration in, I take a walk outside and I see a leaf and I'm like, that's a different red than I've seen before. And she starts to process that and she starts to think about it. But I think that that's inherent in some of, in like Joe's story, and thinking about, we are all right now in a situation where we are trying to figure out how to make our homes what they need to be, and I've talked throughout the, some of our segments about, we're in the process of home shopping. I need a home office, all of this kind of stuff. Well, that was something that we had planned to do anyway, but we got accelerated by 5 years. So now at a time when I'm really, really curious for what am I looking for in my new home? How am I going to accommodate a home office and possibly, and where am I going to look for inspiration on that right now? I might need to go over to Joe's house and look at that, or check out what color Lee's walls are. It's almost like we have the ability to influence, you talk about influencers, right?
Sure.
And influencers are a big deal to us. And, certainly all of the, travel and ostentatious lifestyle influencers are not doing as well these days, but the home and lifestyle ones still have a following. But I think we even have the ability to be influencers for one another right now because we're coming up with ideas on how to deal with this stuff.
Tom?
Sorry, I'm dying.
Talk about influencers.
I think that I think that Lee's a great example of the questions that were coming up. Even our icons, we want to be just us. I just want you to be me, and I keep telling people not to slam influencers. I have my own opinions, but the next biggest influencer lives next door to you.
Yeah.
It's your next door neighbor, because we've proven that we value look at Edelman Trust Survey. Look at what we just did in our recent national survey. It's like we keep pointing to this fact that consumers trust other consumers. 97% trust rating. It's crazy. So we want each other's opinions. We want to share our experience with each other. And people who are living above it all, let's pretend that the Kardashians are going away because they wanted to. Tell yourself whatever lets you sleep at night. They're going away because we want them to. They're not real, and we want real. We want, even Lee. We're like, what color? I love that question. What color are your rooms? What inspires you? And keep in mind, for the home and housewares industry, very important. Our core trickle down for information, for trends, was the restaurant business. Okay, we were getting a lot, and I hope that we are able to help the restaurant business come back. That's super important. It's not going to be right away, and right now the things that drive, there's nobody telling us sous vide is next. There's nobody telling us. We're learning from each other. We've got a global palate. We want to try new flavors, new seasonings. We want to try new ways of entertaining, but it's not coming off restaurant entertaining. It's coming off of inspiration from Pinterest, from Instagram. We're really inspiring each other, and it's a great thing. That's part of being authentic, right?
I want to stay on, Joe. I'm going to get to you in a second. I want to stay on go back to the trust thing in a second, but I also wanted, Leana mentioned we're not traveling as much as we used to, and I thought it was interesting, and Tom, I know you talked about this. A lot of people are bringing the travel home right now, and you talk about where inspiration comes from. They want to be out, they want to cross the pond, if they will, but you're gonna, and I know Michelle talked a little bit about, you're seeing that international influence in home decorating. I just thought that was an interesting insight. Joe, I want to go back to the issue of trust that Tom alluded on, and the difference between selling and connecting, or pushing and connecting, and kind of where that stands with regard to the opportunity for us to stay closer to consumers.
Yeah, you know, at the beginning, you started with the question, what's the difference between a customer and a consumer? Well, part of it is that, like, it's more than a transaction. Like, it really is listening and receiving the consumer and understanding what they are and the empathy and solving what that need is. So part of where we're at right now is we get this chance to hear what is happening and to really be looking at it going, all right, how can I help them differently than what they are? That we were talking about just a second ago, before the pandemic, we talked about we lived in this selfie world. And right now it's that, but it's not for the purpose of presenting a side of yourself or showing what's happening in your life. It really is almost more celebratory. It's more of a engaging and a connection and a collaboration with your friends and family. And I think that is going to become the source that leads to a lot of these other areas. And so if we can understand and empathize with the consumer, they're going to trust our products. And a key part right now during this pandemic and heading forward is the ability to set your brand for the next 10 years or however long. And a key component of that has to be trust. And the best way to do it is really to have empathy and understanding what your consumer is and what the consumers are, and try to figure out how can I fit into their life so that they can tell their story to the world.
Leon, it is the ultimate reset right now that we're starting. We may not be able to finish it right away, but that's where this is going.
Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier at the beginning of the session about kind of the breakdown of channel silos and this kind of thing. And I think that what we're faced with right now is, consumers who are not only, willing to try new things, but who they need to try new things. They need to, find their needs where they need to fulfill their needs where they can. And in a time when, consumers' needs in a very short period of time have so abruptly, almost violently changed overnight from what they were to what they became. Everything's kind of out the window in terms of the way you used to do it, right, for a consumer. Right. And I think what that means, as we start to reemerge and as, brick and mortar retail starts to pick up again, do people automatically just go back to the same stores they always went to? Well, they're looking for different things from those stores now, right? They're looking for different types of experiences. They're looking for different types of, processes and precautions. And I think there's a huge opportunity for retailers to say, okay, when these consumers come back out of their homes and they come back to physical stores, how do I make sure that I am the one that they want to come to, and that I can develop some kind of loyalty out of that in this new, now, whatever we want to call it, normal?
Yeah. Tom, companies have a chance to sort of reestablish their purpose right now and clarify what their purpose is. It's a brand building exercise, but it's something that I think it rarely gets to you overnight. This time you can sort of start from a blank slate to some degree and give your business kind of a jump start. Yes?
I think also I want to just touch on something that you spoke about yesterday, Leana, and it so resonated with me. And that is the sudden disappearance of a lot of social markers in a way. You're sweet 16, you're graduating from high school, you're getting married. All of these things have changed character. Talk about that a little bit, because to me, that's fascinating.
Yeah, me too. I think we look through and, we are going to be short 300,000 births in the next year because of the sheer number of people who didn't get pregnant for one reason or another this past year. The number of weddings, as everybody knows, is on the, we actually just got, I say this jokingly, we just got disinvited from a wedding the other day because we had gotten to save the date for it.
Sure, it was the pandemic.
yeah, well, and we're like a friend of a family, you know what I mean? It's like we're a friend of an extended family member. And we got the card that said, unfortunately, we need to kind of keep it small. So like, you don't need to save that date anymore. So just these opportunities for gatherings and, people are doing gap years for school. So there's all these traditional home and housewares occasions that aren't happening the way they used to happen. And I brought this up during our panel on post-COVID consumer, and something that Joe said just like lit me up, which was in a good way, which was that, people, it might just be that the nature of the occasions have changed. So weddings was the example that we talked about. And, weddings, when I think about it as a home and housewares occasion, I think about it because it's a major, massive gifting occasion, right? And Joe kind of said, well, okay, well, let's stop looking at it just as a gifting occasion and think about what weddings are right now. A lot of times they're taking place at a small gathering in a backyard. There are all kinds of home and housewares products needs associated with putting on a wedding in your backyard. And it was such an aha moment for me to be like, we need to just be thinking about these occasions differently. When we think about, when people do have babies, we might not have baby showers and all that kind of stuff, but what do you have? What is the function of, the baby celebration? Tom, you talk about celebrate everything. And I've never seen so many lawn signs and drive-by honking birthdays, in the last
it's
year.
it's not just birthdays, it's creating occasions.
Yeah.
And we want to make the pandemic, we've hit the part where we have it down. We know the part of the pandemic that was bad memorable. So now you've got a lot of people committed to making good memories, like we're going to remember how we sat down for dinner. The
human spirit is incredibly adaptable, and I think that's another thing coming out of here.
But we have to keep feeding that.
Yes.
It's really dangerous for our industry to think we've figured this out, because to Peter's continuum, you've never figured it out. There's no history to this. And without history, some people find having no history a real burden. And yeah, maybe it's scary, but it's the perfect environment for reinvention, the perfect environment for innovation.
You get to make your history a little bit, right?
Yes, make history. That's what, even when you look at the consumer, they're making traditions now. And we can be a part of that. We're going to be, you still talk about the baking you did with your daughter. Right. You still talk about the gardening you did with your husband. And you're not doing it because it's a business conversation. When we just, shoot the shit, you're talking about this. So, sorry. But you know what I mean? So it's that you've made memories out of this. And
think of how many people made Thanksgiving dinner last year that never made one before. And so now you got a whole new generation this year when we have Thanksgiving. That one, you're going to celebrate it in probably a pretty big fashion. But now the conversations of how you made it, what you made, what the things, there's going to be so many things that never got discussed before, or at least discussed where both parties are equally interested in the conversation. So it's going to be a wonderful time.
Well, last year's was the most memorable for maybe the wrong reason at some point. This year's going to be the most memorable for a new reason. Right. And that's kind of this cathartic release that now seems so foreign, even though a year and a half ago it seems so normal. It's funny.
Sorry, but what's interesting to me though is that, okay, so it'll be different. It'll be different last year for one reason, different this reason for another year. It's going to be different in another year for yet another, because there's. And I talk about this in a lot of our sessions. There's kind of this like step function method to getting back to some type of normal. And, to bring it back for IHA in the event business, right? And we look at, okay, when's the next show going to be? And you look at it and you say, well, is the next show going to be the new normal, or is the next show going to be a step towards what the new normal is? The next birthday party that I throw for my son in December, this last one, really tightly controlled. This next one, probably somewhere in the middle. A year later, something totally different. So it's I think there's multiple times you got to kind of cycle through before you get to any kind of normalcy.
Think of what Michelle and them said, that the trend curve that they have. Oh, I'm sorry. The trend curve, that there's a trend curve of what, 2.5, 3 years, correct? Mm-hmm. Well, think about that just from a learning perspective. So the Thanksgiving you had last year, and then now you got another year. So now next year, if we listen right, we can even make it much better. Like, it's the learning part is also on that path. And this year is really a pivotal year to set up 2022.
Well, and I'm going to say something different, point to something different that Michelle and said in her seasonal presentation. It's gathering is going to be completely different for a lot of reasons, but it's, again, I hate to make emotion a currency, but empathy is absolutely a currency. She was pointing to how gathering, there's going to be a tremendous amount of thankfulness on a whole new level this year. And it's not just going to be, we're still going to be fighting, but we're going to love it. It's that idea of gathering is going to be incredibly thankful. It's going to be much more deeply felt. And, it's again, we're at the table. Our industry is at that table. It's ours to lose, but it's in trend is going to be about evolution, not revolution. This is a slow, it's that steps that you're talking about, Leana. And we can talk, Joe, I won't ask you to get too deep into it, but something you said yesterday, we were talking about this difference of opinion about where is disposable income going to go, and I think that a lot of people in our industry are hearing, oh, well, it's going to go to travel. Everybody's going to spend, they're going to blow everything on travel, all the money they save. What do you think about that? What's your data pointing to?
Well, I think people will be traveling. So I absolutely think that's going to happen. And it might even happen more depending on the data in 2022. But what's also going there, one of the things that Don talked about is we're going to have more small group gatherings. We're going to have more large group gatherings. We're going to have people going to the office. We're going to have people doing all these other needs and we're going to be working from home to some degree going forward. All of those suddenly mean there's a lot of opportunities. So we might go to a restaurant on the weekend, so Friday or Saturday night, and so maybe you do 3-4 more a month than you normally would do. But if you work hybrid, you're going to do 8 more lunches a year that you didn't do before. You're going to do 8 more breakfasts a year. There's going to be all these times that you can really solve a different need that wasn't there. So while these things are happening, it's not an either or, it's an and statement here.
Mm-hmm.
When you brought that up, it's if the industry doesn't figure out a way to take advantage of this return, they're missing the opportunity right now. It's not about giving into it. It's about understanding it better and finding. And by the way, speaking of kind of working at home, I know the one word that I heard the last 2 weeks that I hadn't heard before that I'm going to remember, and that is the word office. I believe Lee Eisman brought it up to describe the convergence of taking your closet and converting it into a stowaway office. So thank you, Lee, for that reference. It's funny, we've invented a lot of words, I think, during the pandemic, or we've used words we haven't used in a long time. One of the words that, again, we talked about consumer being that common thread. Well, the word purpose is also embedded in that common thread. The consumer, in this case, being the purpose. But businesses have to have purposes. And to Leana's point, just because you hadn't done something a certain way before doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do it now. But the purpose requires you to get there in many steps. Leana, what's your point of view on kind of how you identify a purpose right now and how you get there?
Gosh, I might punt on this one really quick. So, I mean, when I think about purpose, I guess I think about it in terms of, some of the, what are you putting forth as your brand, right? Who are you trying to be for the consumer? And I guess, I still believe that it's about, you can be, when we talk about branding, we talk about a North Star, right? And you talk about, this is your guidepost, this is who you are, this is what you want to be. But the best North Stars out there from a branding standpoint are the ones that you can get to in multiple different ways, right? It's not one way and then you've landed that North Star, there's only one way to get there. And you can, I think about it with IHA, I mean, we are doing a virtual event here because we are a connector of buyers and sellers. We are an industry gatherer. That is what we are at our core. And we're doing it in a different way this March than we've done it in Marches in the past. And then we will do it next March. But still, if our North Star is about connecting people, well, we've figured out another way to do it. So to me, that's what it is. It's finding that North Star and not worrying as much about exactly how you're going to get there as much as you worry about the critical nature of what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, yeah, it's the difference between your purpose maybe being to sell more stuff versus to take care of the consumer.
Right.
So they want more. Yeah. So they want more stuff.
Peter,
go ahead, Joe.
One of the things, we talked about at the beginning there, the difference between wants versus needs.
Right.
One of the benefits of a need is it creates urgency. And so one of the things that we need to do during this period is to help create some of that urgency. And a key way to do it is really by having that insight into what is going on. So the North Star, the way I look at it for our industry, is pretty simple. It is really about bettering consumers' lives. Right. And if we focus on that, we listen and we anticipate how can we better consumers' lives, that is going to help us identify and listen to needs and think of new ways to solve them that will move us into that urgency, into that need space that makes us then be able to compete against all the other ways that consumers can spend their money, whatever those things are. If we are aggressive, both in our marketing and innovation, we can battle against that.
And I think that the difference also between, North Star is, first, it's a great, it's something we all understand. So when we're trying to figure out exactly what purpose means, it's the best, it's the best synonym. But a North Star is something, first, you never get there. Your journey is that vision of achieving something that is constant, constant work. But it's important to understand, like, North Star was kind of an internal language. Purpose is a very external, transparent mission. You're telling consumers, you're sharing with consumers, because consumers are significantly, I think it's like 48% on Edelman Trust, but more likely to forgive a company mistakes if their purpose is clear and relatable. So, whether it's Levi's making a mission of using less water, in their process, whether it's being greener, and the more specific you get, speaks to whether or not you want to focus on your particular consumer, or your customer, or your market. But I think that it's important to, like Joe said, you've got to talk about your mission. You've got to be willing to be held accountable to it, and it's got to show an empathy to it. It's got to be about the consumer, because when you look at trust, one of the 4 big tenets of trust is what we call self-orientation. Is the business concerned about just itself at the end of the day, or is it concerned about itself and me? Who are they oriented towards? So, and trust is that purpose-driven business has to be about building trust and building usefulness.
Well, talking about shared experiences with regard to identifying that North Star, that purpose, from a business standpoint, I think it's incumbent upon companies not just to have that North Star or that purpose, but to share it from the top to the bottom of an organization, so that every component within that organization understands what the objective is. And it's not about necessarily always about anniversarying last year's numbers. To Joe's point, if you do all these things toward your purpose, and you're paying attention to all things, the anniversarying of the numbers will begin to start taking care of themselves.
And keep your purpose quantifiable.
Yeah.
Purpose means nothing if it's like, our purpose is innovation. Well, congratulations, right. You innovated on a peeler. That's not what people are interested in. It's like, show me that your purpose is in something specific. Like, I was reading something from Sloan IBM, or an IBM survey, and what they said was that there's a significant issue with data trust. So why isn't somebody saying, our commitment is protecting your data? And that could be, we talked about that with smart technology and it being a significant roadblock, to adhesion. But that's something. It doesn't have to be, build a better burger. It could be about something that matters to them, that isn't a product, but is just a general, something they're concerned about in their life.
One of the things you talked about earlier, how people are, not only are they, as employees, we are much more tied to what the consumer is doing, because we also went through this experience together. One of the challenges companies have when they set their missions and their visions, and sometimes, is getting the employees to feel it and to really believe it and get it in their fiber. I think what the pandemic has done is it has allowed us that for those companies who are going to create that North Star, whatever that is, it actually might be, and if it is tied to the consumer, it might be easier to get enrollment and buy-in and passion by all the employees if it's something that's tied really to the needs, because the reality is they either lived it, they know people who have lived it, they experience it, and they understand it much more. There's a greater employee empathy that'll tie into that.
Leana, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, again, this is my branding and marketing background, is just that, to me, a North Star is never about an internal, sales goal. There's a service piece to it. It's about what you're doing for someone else. Your reason for existing as a company should be to make somebody's life better. And maybe that's the, people, maybe that's the shareholders, but I don't think that should be your North Star, right? If you have a strong North Star and you're aiming for it and you're doing a good job of reaching for it, shareholder, dividends will come and the sales will come, and and innovation will come, right? But just innovation for innovation's sake is not a North Star. Why? Why are you doing it? Who are you doing it for? Without the answers to those questions, it's really not a purpose.
That was an interesting takeaway this week, was that, innovation for innovation's sake just wasn't enough. I thought that was kind of interesting, that whole conversation.
I think it applied across the board. Technology for technology's sake, material for material's sake.
Right.
There has to be a broader purpose made up of all these ingredients that go into it. And it's also about, when you ask questions and get your answer, the next step is sometimes to ask the next question. It's this constant, as you said, Tom, it's this constant pursuit of that purpose, knowing that maybe sometimes you never really fully reach it because it kind of moves and shifts a little bit. And that's back to the continuum again of the consumer. I want to go around quickly before we get to some questions, the audience. Are there any other points that we haven't covered today? Any other sessions that you feel that we should at least call out to, or something that we didn't get to that kind of that wraps up this whole conversation about taking care of the consumer and finding that purpose?
I'll take that one for a second. I really liked the not to throw bouquets at Michelle Lamb again. She's gonna have to grease her head to get through the door tonight. But when I look at the trend curve and Project Partners post-COVID consumer presentation, they talked about brain science, and it's really worth revisiting when we release that, because they made some really I think it's hard for business to look at saying, get in people's heads, understand how people think. It's very vague and it's scary because it seems imprecise. But I thought that they did a really good job of pointing to, look, there's science behind this. And it says, if you approach consumers this way and via this, modus, then they will adopt, they will understand better. And this is how you communicate empathy. And this is how you communicate this. And I thought that the science part of it was a great way to help people who are less comfortable with these sort of fuzzy logic types of things to get into that conversation.
And I think she made a point. It's not just good enough sometimes to satisfy them. The goal is making people happy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Leana, any other observations that you caught on to?
I mean, not to go right back to Michelle's presentation again. Just I will say though, is that there was just a lot of inspiration in that one for me, and there really was in Lee's as well. I love a really solid data foundation, and then having layered on top of that some of these really inspirational visuals that remind you about the kind of joy that our industry, the products that our industry produces, inject into people's lives. And so I think that the opportunity continues to be huge. I think that we are not by any means done. Again, as we talk about things like, okay, now people are going to trick out home offices or cloffices or whatever they are, or people are upgrading homes or anything like that. While we don't necessarily want to compare our 2021 to 2020, I still think there's just so much boundless opportunity for our industry to be there for the consumer and to help provide solutions.
Joe, final points, and then I have a kind of wrap up a question in several questions into one question from our audience. But Joe, any kind of concluding thoughts from you in terms of some of your takeaways?
A couple of them. One, I thought it was interesting when Mark had talked about how he's measuring things much more tightly. And I think that's an important way in this time period where there is such change, where data is a critical piece, especially timely data. It's constantly being monitored so that you can really evaluate what the consumers are doing. So I think that's a key part. The second one is I also like what Tom said when we had the consumer panel, that oftentimes we think about marketing, we think about product innovation when we talk about innovation in the product perspective marketing. But he talked about also just reminding, it goes all the way through the cycle. How are you going to do payment? How are you going to deliver the product to the consumer? Like this whole innovation that we're talking about, it is across to use the old buzzword path of consumption. We can't forget about all of the elements have to have their time and constantly press. What are new ways to do it? And you having data, having the ability to really understand the nuances and the changes and managing those are key right at this time.
It's funny, the question that I was going to pose to all of you, I wanted to start with you, sort of speaks to that. We've been talking a lot about marketing innovation and consumer and trend, but operational innovation is part of that equation as well. I know you've spoken to it. And one of our guests asked, well, how do you reconcile the need for agility, kind of this theoretical need to be faster and swifter and pivot with supply chain issues, which you may be somewhat out of control. And it makes me wonder, in this conversation about doing all the things we've talked about, one of the responses from companies will make people, that's great, but I've got these restraints within my organization, and they might be restraints that are sort of out of my control. So I think we need to consider operational innovation and watch that and how that ultimately takes care of it. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't mean to.
Leana, I'll get to you in a second.
Leana.
Okay. No, I guess I would just say that, and it goes back to exactly how this question started, right? Which is that marketing and positioning are a very, that's something you can control, right? I understand that when you're dealing with supply chain issues and operations, there's only so much control you have, but how you talk about your product, how you market it, and how you link it to consumer needs is entirely within your control. So I think there's a huge role for marketing to play there.
Yeah, Tom, we learned that from materials yesterday, the material connection. You have an opportunity to tell a story about yourself that sort of encompasses all the things that are in your control, and maybe some of those things are a little out of your control.
Well, I think also agility is about being able to address your core in a, core is core because it's flexible. There's a reason why it's core. It's core because it's flexible in terms of its use, in terms of its application to your life. So look at your core and say, to Leana's earlier point, how can I address that differently? The weighted blanket, I bring that up once in a while because it's like the weighted blanket was a trend in 2016, okay? But somebody said, you know what, people need that now. We're gonna bring that back. You look at what Nordic Wear did. I'm trying to promote particular people, but it's like they took the whole like individual portions, like not pawing other people's foods, and turned it into, cakelets and bitelets and all these other things. And but none of that's new,
Well, bread makers. I mean, bread makers weren't new, they just
like it's making going back to your core and saying what here is newly resonant,
right.
And then so it doesn't always have to do with, and we have learned that we have to cut down the the development process and make it something more reasonable, and expand the the purpose of new innovation so that it's not obsolete in 4 months, but
well, new innovation really only succeeds on top of a strong core in many respects.
Exactly.
It's the foundation. You can if you keep the basic four walls and foundation intact, and you decorate, you add, and you embellish, you have an opportunity to use that core as the reference point for all of the things that you're doing.
Right? But also just when we can't be consumer centric without also realizing that the concept of value is something that is very consumer, it's like we can sit in a product development meeting and say, wow, look, this spatula, it's the same radius as the inside of the KitchenAid bowl. So it's a better spatula because it gets more up. Consumers don't see that. It's like when you talk about value and talk about communicating a message to a bombarded consumer, make sure that your points of differentiation and your values and what you're delivering is very clear. Stick to a few really clear messages that really deliver differentiation.
Well, I hope we all have a chance to look back at the sessions when they come out in a few weeks. There's so much to glean from them. We couldn't cover it all today, and I think we'll all be able to sit down in the future and start talking about some of these things even more in depth. It's been a real pleasure and my privilege to have worked with Leana, Tom, and Joe on the Connect Spring programs over the last 2 weeks, and all the planning that they put into it even before that. I want to thank this session's sponsor today again, Jura. I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank everyone in the audience, and I'd like to turn it over to Leana Salamah one more time so she can say a few words.
Thanks so much, Peter. I just wanted to thank so sincerely everybody who's been involved with these last 2 weeks with Connect Spring. This was a very ambitious undertaking for us, and we've gotten just wonderful response to it. And we so appreciate the industry coming together in this manner and, you know, using March for what we at IHA want it to be, which is a time for the industry to pull together and talk about ideas and discover new products. So it has been a labor of love, and we are just delighted that we've seen the response that we have. I do want to note that all of our sessions, with the exception of Lee Eisman for copyright reasons, will be posted in their entirety in video in the mid-April timeframe. So we will send emails out and make sure that everybody knows when those sessions are available. Also want to let everyone know that we will be sending out a survey in the next, or probably early next week, to everybody who participated, to get an idea of, you know, kind of what worked, what didn't, and how do we make the next virtual event, you know, really sing. And lastly, I just want to quickly answer a question that I saw pop up here, Peter, which is the question related to something I talked about with precursors of consumer behavior. And it was Don Unser's presentation from NPD Group. It was called Post-COVID Retailing. And again, that will be available in mid-April. So thank you very much to everybody, to this group, to everyone who participated in putting this event together, and to everyone in the industry who so graciously, you know, engaged with us and gave us some of their time to hopefully learn a little bit and connect with some folks.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.